In this video, we will look at JavaScript, which is introduced as a scripting language in plugin version 4.3. JavaScript will not replace the previous MIDI script language used up to now. Both scripting languages will continue to work side by side, and you can choose whichever works best for you. This will not be a JavaScript tutorial. If you are not familiar with JavaScript, I recommend gaining a basic understanding of it before watching this video. You can use any text editor or development tool to write JavaScript. In this video, I will use VS Code, and I have configured it to use IntelliSense, which provides help information from the plugin. At the end of the video, I will explain how to configure VS Code to do this. I recommend developing JavaScript in separate files because it quickly becomes too large to fit in the Stream Deck editor's small script field. The plugin will treat files with the .js extension as JavaScript. All other extensions will be treated as MIDI script. You can write JavaScript in the script field in the editor if the first line in the editor is the characters JS. So let's get started. Let's create a simple script for a dial fader that sends a CC command when you rotate the fader and moves the fader when it receives a CC command. You don't need a script to do this, but this simple example illustrates the principles of JavaScript development for the plugin. When an event occurs, for instance a received MIDI command, the plugin will scan all loaded scripts to determine whether any script has a function to execute. Every event has its own function name that must be used for the plugin to recognize that the script wants to be notified when that event occurs. When, for instance, a CC command is received, the plugin scans all loaded JavaScripts for functions named exactly OnControlChangeReceived. If a script declares this function, it will be called every time a CC command is received from an external source. So let's do some scripting. If we want to add the OnControlChangeReceived function, we can just start typing on C, and you get a list of all functions that contain these characters. What we want is the OnControlChangeReceived, so we select that one, and we get a basic function declared. The fact that this script now has a function with that name causes the plugin to call this function every time a control change command is received. So let's add some function. What we want to do is to move the fader according to the received value and possibly also display the value in the display. What we can use is the UI function, which maps to most of the editor functions and the display functions. So let's type UI dot, and you get a list of all the functions we can use, and we want to set the value for the fader, so we add value like that. And let's say we also want to display the text, so we set UI.text, also the value like that. So now we will move the fader and we will display the fader value every time the plugin receives a control change command. So let's start Cubase and see what's happening. As you can see, the fader is all over the place. And that is because it reacts on every control change command that is received. And that is probably not what we want. So let's change this. We need to add a check to see that it really reacts on only the thing it should react to. So if we add a test and say if channel equals 1 and the control equals 31, which is the selected channel for Cubase. If those two things are fulfilled, we should perform our tasks. So let's save this script and now see what will happen when we run Cubase. Nothing. And that is because it now only reacts to volume changes. So if I change the volume in Cubase, you see that the volume on the fader also changes. Now we probably want to be able to rotate the dial and have the fader respond to that. So we need to add a new function, and that is OnDialRotated, which will be called every time you rotate the dial. Here we can use the MIDI object to send a CC, and we want to send it on channel 1, control 31, and we want to send the value received from the fader. And we probably also want to display that same value in the display. So if we save this script and see what will happen in Cubase if I rotate the dial in the Stream Deck. One final thing that you may want to do is to initialize this fader to the correct value when the script is loaded. And to do that, you have the OnInit function. First, you need to get the latest received or sent MIDI value for the control. So we create a variable and use the MIDI object again to get CC value for channel 1, control 31. Then we can use the same functions as before to set the fader to the correct value and to set the text to the same value. So when this script is loaded, the OnInit will be run and it will fetch the latest sent or received value for that control and set the fader accordingly and the text. I will not talk about all the event functions or all the action objects you can use because that would take forever. So you need to check the website for details. I will talk a bit about variables because it can be a bit confusing. So if we open the variable window and try to fit everything on the page here, well, something like that. In the OnInit function, I have declared the variable value. So if we run the OnInit function, we can do that with the button in the editor. We run it, and you see in the script variable window, nothing happens. And that is because variables declared within a function only exists when that function executes, and they are not visible from outside. So the plugin cannot access those variables. If I declare a variable at the script root, and then I can assign a value to that variable in the function, like that. Now, if I run the OnInit function again, I need to save that script first, like that, and then I run OnInit, And if we find the variable window, you see that we now have the variable myvar with the value. This can be a bit confusing if you are used to JavaScript terminology, because in JavaScript terminology, this variable is a global variable because it is accessible from all functions. But from a plugin point of view, it's a local variable because it's only accessible within this script. So the script variable window declares that this is a local variable. So what about global variables? There is a helper function called gvar. So if we add gvar dot global var, that will declare a global variable from the plugin point of view and save the value to it. So if we save that script and run the OnInit again and find the variable window, we now have a global variable with the same value. And the variable type says that it is a global variable. So in JavaScript, you have three levels of variables. You have function variables that are not accessible from outside. You have script local variables that are defined in the script root. And you have global variables that are accessible using the gvar function. JavaScript doesn't have the same restrictions for names for variables, so global variables can be named however you like. But if you want the global variables to also be accessible from MIDI scripts, they must not be prefixed with L_, since those names are by definition local variables in MIDI scripts. So let's take a look at how you configure VS Code. Of course, you don't have to do this. You can just open VS Code and start typing your script just as with any other text editor. But with this configuration, VS Code gets knowledge about the functions and objects used by the plugin, so you get better support while typing. To configure VS Code, you basically need to do two things. And the first thing is to go to the Global Settings action and the Script Settings tab, where there is now a new section for VS Code configuration. Here you click the button and confirm that you want to do this, and hopefully you get a message saying that files are installed successfully. What it has done is to create the folder JS in the Trevliga Spel folder and copied a number of folders and files to that folder. Apart from the readme.js file, you should leave the other files and folders alone unless you have very specific requirements and know exactly what you are doing. So that was the first step. The second step you perform in VS Code. So let's open VS Code and open the JS folder. I have to open a copy of the JS folder, otherwise I can't show you what the next step is. So let's open the JS copy folder. And then we open the readme.js file. In the lower right corner you will get a pop-up where you need to click the Allow button. This is essential to have this thing work as expected. As you noticed, the pop-up is visible for a short time for some reason. And if you miss to click the Allow button, there is another way to get the same setting performed. So if you press Ctrl-Shift-P or Command-Shift-P on Mac, and select the TypeScript, select TypeScript version, and then the Use Workspace version. That is the same thing as clicking the Allow button in the pop-up. That is all you need to do to get the configuration to work. You should now have some things working. If you start typing on, you should get a list of event functions called by the plugin, and you can select one of the functions, and it will insert the function definition for that function. You will also get IntelliSense information for objects in the plugin. So if we start to type MIDI, you will get a list of all the functions you can perform in the MIDI object. And if we, for instance, want to send a command change command, you will get information what kind of parameters you need to do this. So first a MIDI channel, and then a CC number, and then a value. To have this IntelliSense and snippets available for your scripts, all JavaScripts must be created in this JS folder. That's all for this video. Thanks for watching.